Welcome to Nevertheless Podcast with Bidemi Mark-Mordi, a show dedicated to organic leaders and leaderpreneurs. Today, you would learn how to discover your essence and live more powerfully.
Hi, welcome to the Nevertheless Show, a show for organic leaders and leaderpreneurs. My name is Bidemi Mark-Mordi, and this series we're looking at the subject matter of rejection. Why does rejection sting so badly? And what are the ways by which we can overcome rejection? In our previous episode, I introduced what rejection was. I said that rejection was the painful feeling of not feeling valued or accepted. And I did say to us that sometimes it is not even the intended result or goal of the person who rejects us, but just that we conceive and we receive or perceive what they've done to us as rejection. And that can begin to trigger a lot of emotions: anger, abandonment, fear, doubt, low self-esteem, the feeling of not being enough. When we look at when a person begins to suffer from rejection. I also shared with us that as someone who is suffering from this thing about rejection, that I have seen it happen to many people, and that it defies class, status, or pedigree. It's not that it's only poor people that suffer rejection. Neither is it that it's only women that suffer rejection. I've seen men, powerful men in their own right, struggle with their spouse over rejection. I've seen very strong people go through divorce, and just that idea that they've been rejected by the one person that they love the most begins to trigger a lot of pain and sometimes impotence, if you like. They become incapacitated and they're not able to move forward in their lives. I told us that the reason why it stings so much is because the people who tend to reject us are the people that we have accepted and we have opened ourselves up to. This episode, I'm going to focus on the wrong ways to deal with rejection, because a lot of people, suffer this. And I had alluded to this before, that in psychology, that people begin to deal with rejection by avoidance. That's what we're told to do. We're told to avoid those people who reject us. But what happens when those people are your family, like they did to Jesus in John chapter 7? Or what happens when these people are from your home country or hometown, like they did to Jesus in Mark chapter 6? So it's not in every case that avoidance is the best way to deal with rejection. So it's one of the most common mistakes. Another mistake that we make in dealing with rejection is to pretend that it did not happen. We pretend that we are not hurt. So someone rejects you, or someone does something that makes you feel like you have been rejected, and you do not say it. You pretend because you do not want to sound petty, or you do not want for people to think that you are weak. Now, the downside of acting like that is that while everybody thinks you're strong and you can take anything, you are bottling up emotions that can lead to bitterness, resentment, and even physical stress. I've had people suffer. I've seen people suffer illnesses for this kind of reason. Something has been happening in their relationship, and rather for them to speak up and confront it and see if they can, have a conversation or have conversations around it and find a resolution. The resolution doesn't have to be what you want, but it just has to be that you have processed the toxins out of your system. But a lot of people bottle them up, and all these unhealthy feelings that are now bottled up begin to manifest in unhealthy ways. Say, for instance, if you look at Genesis chapter 4, in the account of Cain and Abel, when God rejected Cain's offering, Cain did not process his feelings enough to seek understanding. Instead, he allowed anger and jealousy to consume him to the point that he took the life of his brother Abel. The funny thing, or the instructive thing, is that when God came back on the scene, God said to him, if you had done well, you would have been considered. Which suggests that Cain could have spoken to God about it, to say, Lord, I don't know why you'd reject my offering. I gave it in the highest integrity of my heart. And perhaps God would have taken him through a teaching moment of why it was that his offering was rejected. That we ignore rejection does not mean that it goes away. It only festers and morphs into something else. And by that, things can happen that shouldn't happen. If I go back to the account of Cain, it's interesting that when God decided Cain's punishment, Cain now spoke up. And because Cain spoke up, they said to God, he said, do not allow anyone to harm me. And God said, no, anybody who harms Cain would have to pay with their own life, which meant that he could have come even from the first time to have a conversation with God that would deal with this so that he doesn't wallow in rejection and the feeling of not feeling like he was wanted. Another wrong way that we deal with rejection is to seek validation for ourselves in all the wrong places. Recently I had taking someone through some coaching sessions over something that had happened to them. And we had not actually finished the process. Then I saw that, any small thing, she will pop up, she'll do this, she'll pop up, she'll do that. She was all over the place on social media. And I could tell that she was medicating with social media validation for what she felt was rejection in her personal life. I reached out to her and I did say to her, I think that you need to just take a break from all of this activity so that you can deal with how you are feeling before you go out there. Because from where I sit and I'm looking at you, what has happened is you are taking what you couldn't find where you felt you should get it. You are now running to social media, to strangers to get the validation that your family wasn't able to give you. I do not know whether she took the counsel, but the point is that when we do not deal with rejection, or one of the wrong ways we deal with rejection is to begin to seek for validation in all of the wrong places. People have become hooked to drugs because they want to feel good about a rejection that they suffered from their parents. People have become sex addicts because they wanted to prove their worth by external validation. Why is this harmful? It can lead to unhealthy relationships where people would even take even greater advantages of us and break us even more. If I had to give you an example in the Bible, I'll think about King Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 15. Saul disobeyed God's command because he feared rejection from the people. He did the things that were not convenient for his destiny because he didn't want the people to say he was not a good king or that he was not a strong king or he was not something. When we allow people to determine or when we do not sit down, confront our feelings of rejection and deal with them, what's bound to happen is we'll look for validations in places that are not convenient. And when we do that, we get into further trouble. In Galatians chapter 1 verse 10, Paul said, he said, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or God? In the end, what works for you is that you stick with God because he's the one that you know, and he's the one that has promised to never leave us nor forsake us. We cannot deal with rejection by seeking validation for other places. Go to God and hear his heart for you. It is always the strongest foundation that a man can have when they are grappling with feelings of rejection. Yes? One of the third wrong ways that we deal with rejection is that we blame ourselves excessively. I was in another session with someone not too long ago, and what they said to me was that, that when they sit down and they reflect at the season of their lives where they suffered such intense rejection, they are amazed that they subjected themselves to that. They are wondering how did I stick in this kind of place to be rejected like this over and over again, and I did not do what was best for me. That is self-blame, and self-blame is deadly when it comes to dealing with rejection. You are the one that has been rejected. Don't turn inward and blame yourself entirely for what happened, questioning your own worth. I used to be someone who would blame myself, and I'll go lens to tell myself is because I wasn't discerning. Maybe I could have done this better and I could have done that better. But one day, the Lord had to stop me in my tracks and say to me, Bidemi, it's not always about you. And in that conversation that I had with God, I realized that yes, I trusted someone and they rejected me does not make me a bad person. Trust is a virtue. They are the ones that were deceitful and strung me along or deceived me when I was trusting of them. That I trusted someone and they acted badly is not on me. They are the ones that acted badly. The mindset that it is you that is at fault when someone is the one who's rejected you and treated you without trust is to begin to head towards low self-esteem, to begin to wallow in self-doubt. Here's the point. Self-reflection is important. It's okay for you to reflect and ask yourself, what was my part in this? But when it comes to dealing and grappling with the feelings of depression, rejection, I beg your pardon, I want you to see that the other party, even if inadvertently, contributed to how you are feeling. And it's not always because you are not smart enough to discern people and decode how they do with you. It is what it is. They were not good to you. And that is on them. It is not on you. When we self-blame, it distorts our reality and it keeps us stuck. If I think about this, I'll consider Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19. In the book of 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah was the one. Jezebel rejected Elijah. She sent a note to Elijah and she promised to kill Elijah, separate his head from his body, as Elijah had done to the prophets of Baal. And Elijah went on the run. And in this journey of running, Elijah started to feel like a failure. He started to feel like he was alone. He started to say, no, I failed. He isolated himself. And somehow Elijah started to blame himself for what God, allowed him to process Israel through. Simply because Jezebel woke up and Jezebel decided that Elijah was not good enough to live. Rejection doesn't define your worth or your value. Just because someone does not appreciate who you are in God does not mean that you are valueless. Psalm 139 verse 14 says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And what that means is that you were rejected. You can't blame yourself for being rejected. I'm going to take a break now. When I come back, I'll share with you a few more ways that we don't deal with rejection properly, and that begins to take a toll on us rather than make us better. Please do not go away. I'll be right back. This is the Nevertheless Show, and my name is Bidemi Mark-Mordi. God bless you.
Are you seeking to clarify your purpose and profit from it? Then get into Purpose University this year. It's a 10-week e-course for people of faith who seek to clarify their purpose and profit from it. The DNA of purpose has been put together to help you understand what purpose is about and also help you discover what your journey of purpose looks like. Register today at yourpurposeu.org, where Bidemi Mark-Mordi would hold your hands so you can discover your purpose and live a more powerful life. In a world filled with many fears and discouragement, life often becomes a burden. For those who know the way, life is just simple. Do not worry, you're not alone on this life's journey, as Bidemi Mark-Mordi shares powerful insights and principles from her everyday work and life experiences in her book, Nevertheless. Nevertheless is a book designed to encourage and equip you to face life with courage, hope, and determination. Get a copy of Nevertheless and other books written by Bidemi Mark-Mordi, like The Wisdom of the Seed, Honor, The Theology of Work, and so much more from a bookstore nearby, or call 080-905-63555, or send an email to bidemi@bidemimarkmordi.com to place your order. I guarantee you will make it. nevertheless.
Welcome back. It's still episode 2 of the Rejection series. And today we're looking at the wrong ways to deal with rejection. Before we went on the break, I shared with us that avoidance is not a way to deal with rejection. I also shared with us that blaming oneself is not a good way to deal with rejection. Neither does seeking validation outside a good way to deal with rejection. As we continue on in that train of thought, my fourth point on how to deal with rejection, or one of the wrong ways that we deal with rejection, is lashing out. I think that sometimes when a person is rejected, they feel embarrassed. And in that embarrassment, they begin to lash out. Sometimes rejection will make us defensive. So we get this defensive, because of the embarrassment, and long and short, we begin to lash out. Now, the thing about lashing out is we usually never lash out at the person who rejected us. Who do we focus on? We focus on the innocent bystanders around us, our children, our spouses, the people, our staff at work, those who cannot answer back to us. And we begin to do exactly what the perpetrator did to us to them. Why is this harmful? This is harmful because this response damages the relationships that could have become support for us in that moment. And then obviously it creates a cycle of hurt. So that one person hurts me, I hurt the next person. And if that other person responds like me, they hurt another person. And before you know it, this vicious web of rejection and the pain of rejection becomes some of the most deadly things that happen within families. It damages relationships and it causes for others to begin to hurt. Anger may feel like a release in the moment, but anger rarely leads to resolution or healing. So what that means is that you cannot respond to rejection by being defensive or embarrassed. Because if you feel defensive and you feel embarrassed, you will lash out at someone who was not a contributor to what you feel. In Numbers chapter 20, from verse 10 to 12, Moses experienced this. Moses and the children of Israel had been behaving badly and rejecting every level of leadership that Moses extended to them. Moses, that God described as one of the meekest men on earth, became the Moses who lashed out at the Israelites when they complained about water. The frustration had built over time because he never confronted their bad behavior. And because he did not confront their bad behavior, a day came where he lashed out so badly that God said to him, "Speak to the rock." And instead, he struck the rock. And guess who suffered for it? Moses. He was the one that God told that he wouldn't enter the promised land. And he ended up not entering the promised land. Here's the point. Instead of reacting in anger, instead of being defensive, instead of embarrassment, either bring your frustrations to God or confront the one who is meting out the treatment that you do not like. The Bible says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. You can take these things in your stride. It takes practice, I know. But rather than get upset, it becomes something that you process yourself through. I'll give you a personal example. I used to, because like I told you, rejection is something that, for me, it's a tug and a pull from time to time. I got into a season of my life that if a staff decided to leave my employment, it would mean that for months, it would be a downward spiral for me. Because in my head, I'm trying to figure out, why did they leave? Why did they want to leave? What did I do? What did I not do? And then that becomes anger because They are now frustrated at that because I can't deal with it. And they are not within my purview to deal with. And then I begin to translate or transmit that frustration to other members of staff that did not do anything. What did you think happened? It will sully the relationships around me. It will affect the work quality, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, our bottom line will be impacted, but most importantly, our relationships will be strained. So instead of reacting like that, what I have learned to do is process how I feel by myself. And when I'm able to process how I feel by myself, guess what happens? It takes me away from allowing others to dictate for me what feels right in the process. So lately, I'm doing so much better in that department. If you choose to leave, yes, of course, I'll still conduct a semblance of an exit interview because I need to know first with myself, what did I do wrong, if I did anything wrong? And then secondly, to recognize that sometimes people just will be people and they will do what they need to do. So you cannot respond to rejection by lashing out because you are embarrassed or you're feeling defensive. The fifth way that people tend to deal with rejection, and it is wrong, is by isolating themselves. So we crumble every other relationship and we say to ourselves, it's because they are in my life. That's why they could do this to me. And what happens is that we move away from them and we begin to do things, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves in isolation. Rejection will make you withdraw if you allow it, because you now have the fear that others will come and hurt you again. And because you do not want to face that fear, or you do not want to be hurt again, you find yourself now in isolation. Now, I typically would say to people that isolation is the first step to destruction. If the enemy wants to destroy you, the first thing he will do is he will isolate you. And the moment you are isolated, he can destroy you using you, the thoughts in your head. That's how come people have committed suicide, because someone said they wouldn't marry them anymore, or because someone called off a relationship. They withdrew to themselves, and in that isolation, the enemy finds them vulnerable and begins to feed their minds with unhealthy thoughts. And ultimately, sometimes they act on those thoughts. Isolation leads to loneliness. It leads to depression. I have found that the best way to deal with rejection is to vent to someone. After I've processed my feeling, I always vent to someone. And I vent not because they can change the situation. Neither do I vent because I'm expecting them to be able to tell me anything profound. I vent because that's how I get the toxins out of my system, and I'm able to move on and continue to do life with the people who are left in my life. When Peter denied Jesus 3 times in Luke chapter 22, it is a profound example, because the Bible says he was filled with shame. And because of that, he left. He said to everybody else, he said, I go fishing. He was trying to isolate himself, but thank God some disciples went with him. That's how bad rejection can cause us to be when we begin to self-isolate. And it is interesting and instructive that even in that relationship, Jesus came back in John 21 to restore the same Peter to himself. Now imagine that in the process of isolation, if he had done something untoward to him, how would he have ever known that there was a restoration ahead of him? We cannot allow rejection to push us into isolation. Rather, seek support from trusted friends or from your community. The sixth wrong way that some people deal with, or that people tend to deal with rejection, is that they become bitter and cynical. We become bitter and cynical. Some people respond to rejection by becoming bitter. They become cynical towards life itself. And so you find them, everything you say about life now, they have a sidebar that does not fit the narrative of the conversation that is being had on the main table. They take their rejection personally, and they allow it to bring them to the place where they become bitter. And they become bitter not just against the one person, they become bitter against life itself. And why this is harmful is because it hardens people's hearts and it makes it difficult for them to trust others. And this also means that it stops them from experiencing joy. In Ruth chapter 1, in verse 20 to 21, we see the account of Naomi. Naomi was so bound over by what life threw at her that one day she got up and she said, "Don't call me Naomi." Naomi, by the way, means pleasant. And she said, "Don't call me pleasant anymore. Instead, call me Mara." Mara meant bitter. So Naomi lived that life. Thank God for Ruth, who stuck with her and helped her process that feeling till she got to the place where she got her life back. Many people who become cynical and they begin to, deal with life, become bitter towards life, don't have the opportunity. Many of us don't get the opportunity like Naomi had, of someone who stuck with them and helped them go through this and arrive where they need to go. Here's the point that I'm trying to make with this point. Bitterness is a heavy burden that blocks healing. When I talk about bitterness, I always talk about the gallbladder. The gall in animals holds a fluid that is green in color and very bitter. When an animal is slaughtered, say a chicken is slaughtered, if that gallbladder isn't taken out carefully from from the chicken, if it bursts and the fluid pours on the meat itself, the meat becomes bitter. Imagine harboring bitterness on the inside of us. It can lead to life-threatening diseases. It's been proven that bitterness and unforgiveness is one of the sources or causes of cancer in people. So bitterness is a heavy burden and it blocks healing. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 15 warns us to see that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root grows within us. We must take this thing very seriously. The seventh way that I want to share with you today that people deal with rejection that is bad is that they give up on their purpose, which suggests that, purpose is one of the greatest antidotes for rejection. And it was what happened to me when God spoke to me those 23 years ago and said to me, "Bidemi, if no one would choose you, choose yourself." It set me up on the path to discovering what God puts me on earth for. It started to expand and expand and expand. And the rest, as they say, is history. Time and time again, when I hit a dead end or what seems like a dead end, I always remember that conversation that God had with me. And I always go back to saying, "Okay, Lord, what did you put me here for? So that I can choose myself." Rejection can make people feel like failures and tempt them to give up on dreams or their callings altogether. I can't begin to tell you how many people in the course of my work I've had to counsel or coach through a spate of time in which they give up on life simply because of rejection. This is harmful because when we respond to rejection by giving up on the meaning of life for us, it often redirects us and takes us away from the path of a worthy life. It leads us to paths down the drain that say to us that we are incapable. It causes us not to explore the power of our potential. And because of that, many people who were profoundly endowed by God potentially have ended up in the dustbin of history as people who did nothing with their lives. Think about Paul when he faced rejection from the Jews in Antioch. He didn't give up. He had to say to himself, if they refuse to choose me, in a manner of speaking, God has chosen me and that's enough for me. And because he embraced that and he ran with it, today we can see that it was the best decision because we are beneficiaries of how Paul chose to deal with a rejection, the rejection that he faced from other Jews in Antioch. The point is that rejection, if we let it, can derail us from our purpose. But God has a plan, regardless of who rejects us or who doesn't reject us. And for that reason, we must not see rejection as God closing the door on our usefulness on earth. Take that rejection, release it as fuel to pursue rigorously and vigorously what God has called you to, and see whether you will not arrive where you need to go. They had the points that I made today. I said some people approach rejection and deal with it by suppressing their feelings and avoiding them. Some seek external validation and in unhealthy ways. Others wallow in excessive self-blame. Some of us lash out. Some of us isolate ourselves. And some of us become bitter. And the rest of us give up on our purpose. Whether it's the first point or the seventh point, none of this works. The question I want to leave you with so that you can take time and reflect today is, how have you dealt with rejection in the past? And now that you know that there are healthier habits, what are you doing to change your toxic habits to embrace healthier ones so that you can continue to move forward? As I close today, I want you to know that you are loved by God. The Bible says that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. God did not just love you. He backed that love by action, and he gave his one and only begotten son so that you can have life and have life more abundantly. That man or woman rejected you is not the end of life. It is time to wake up. It is time to get up from where you fell. It is time to begin to move forward so that you can become the things that God has called you, everything that God has called you to become. Next week when I come, I'll be looking at empowering ways to deal with rejection. Please keep a date with me. It's been the Nevertheless Show, a show for organic leaders and leaderpreneurs. There is so much that God is packed into you. And if you just embrace who you are within, you will live super powerful lives. God bless you. Remember to follow me on social media, whatever platform tickles your fancy. I am there. And my handles are usually in my name, at Bidemi Mark-Mordi. Till next week, may God be with you. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Nevertheless. For more information and resources, call 080-90563-555 or send an email to bidemi@bidemimarkmordi.com. Don't forget, discovering your purpose helps you live more powerfully.